before the din subsides. So, what kind of questions might you have to lead off this discussion? You can continue with yours if you want. Yeah.
I was just asking about kind of how to create the format for your own, even like one-day retreat. Because I've tried to do it kind of informally before, but I feel like I need more structure and like instruction on what to do.
Yeah. When Dora and I decided to do a one-year retreat, we talked to Boka Rinpoche a little bit about it. Right. Because we were familiar with extended retreats, like 3-year retreat, which seemed to have a very particular daily schedule, which seemed like a bit more than we thought we could take on, though consider it. But so we asked, like what would be a good schedule, and he said, well, the important thing is to figure out what you can do. What's like a reasonable schedule that it's challenging enough that you're really putting in some time, but you can do it. Then you make that schedule, and then you stick to it, which is actually, that part's really important. I remember Lama Michael told the story about on his 1-year retreat, 3-year retreat. Lama Sangsing, the retreat master, said, "There's nobody who's slept in once on 3-year retreat." Everybody go, "Wow!" Like nobody has ever had. And then it dawned on them, like the key word was once. That if you do it once, then twice and 3 times, it's almost like you've opened the door. So that's the thing, and I think that's true with the schedule. So it's really good to have something that's doable, and not created according to some sense of divine virtue. This is what the real people would do, which are obviously not me, but I'm going to pretend for a little while. So I'm going to get up at 3 in the morning and practice till 11 at night. No. So it's best to kind of figure out what you can do, and so that's usually some kind of, you have to look at what are you doing on a regular basis, and then figure out what and how is that going. What are the challenges, and what are the what seems to be kind of working? What's the inspiration? And then it really depends on what you really are kind of up for. But generally speaking, for people who have not done a lot of retreat, I recommend some combination of formal practice, just very clear formal practice, some part of active contemplation, structured contemplation, and some study, a little bit of reading, not a lot. Just a few things that might give some additional perspectives. But it's not a time to be cramming information. That just makes the pot kind of boil over and feel like you're trying to carry too many apples. If you kind of pick up a bunch of fruit and you try to put in too many, and then they'll all fall off. So you have to figure that out. But that you can do based on some feedback. But it's good to try something out, like just on a day, and then see where it goes.
I agree with all that. And on your breaks, I think it's, well, one thing I sometimes do is take a nap because if you're coming to retreat after being really busy in your life, and if you find you're being sleepy during your sessions, like, then at least on your break, try to stay awake during your sessions, but take a nap if you need to. Rest up, and then if you have more energy, it can be nice to, just take walks, and just try to, so that you keep your body kind of going, but, trying not to fill your mind with things, but just, be present and take a walk. So those are good.
Yeah, it's very easy to discover how exhausted we are by our daily life on retreat. You take off the kind of the pressure of having to show up, and then all of a sudden it's like, so it's actually worth. That's one of the reasons that multiple day retreats are good, because you can have some time to unwind that a fair amount, especially if the retreat schedule is kind of in sync with your kind of personal general stamina, you could say, general capacity. Then at the beginning, a fair amount of napping probably. One teacher actually more or less forbid people to drink coffee or tea because if you kind of go into this mode and then you're going back, then you have 2 more cups of coffee to solve this problem that you created by having these cups of coffee and not resting beforehand, and it's like better to just fall on your face and then get it over with. After a while, it'll come together. But that's a really good reason to do longer retreat. Yeah. The longer the retreat, the more you can let go of all the things that you think kind of define how you are, kind of these containers. And then you see something about the patterns that you thought were reactions to the kind of the structure of your life. A lot of those are actually they're internal patterns. They're not because so and so does this to me and I don't like it. I'm all here by myself, and I'm still spinning this kind of tale. Well, thank you very much. There's nobody to blame it on now. And that's a bit. It's kind of humiliating, in a nice way. Just kind of. It can be very humorous too when you see that.
So when I'm doing calm abiding, a question is coming up for me about how to integrate maybe some of the more reflective contemplations or practices, like or to generate more compassion. Sometimes it feels like I'm working with the tools of calm abiding, but then the compassion piece doesn't seem to necessarily be there. It is when I'm doing more contemplation, or I'm doing sending and taking, or practices that are more centered around that. But it doesn't seem to be present there in the calm abiding, and then it kind of becomes a distraction too of noticing that it's not there, and then wondering if like how to combine those two sides of practice, or if that's even like a reasonable goal or something that I should aspire to.
They do combine. I think it's good not to make too much of a project out of it, because then you don't quite do either the active cultivation of loving kindness and compassion, or the cultivation of your sort of calm abiding. So like when you're looking in this direction, you're also kind of looking in that direction. So the thing that I think is good, this is another virtue of short sessions, is that you can spend a fair amount of time at the beginning with the refuge in bodhicitta, the cultivation of loving kindness, really considering connection to all beings, really bringing that very vividly to mind, and appreciating that it's actually an ongoing state, that the illusion that we suffer from on a continuous basis is that, oh my goodness, I'm here all alone. And it's only when we're sort of reminded, you sit down in front of me, oh, actually I'm connected to other beings. But the connection is always there. The connection with all phenomena, all beings and all phenomena, is always active. So the more that we can do that and actually feel that, then we can sit in the space of that connection, and then our practice changes. Then it becomes more. But it's not something that we're kind of flipping back and forth. Though a little bit of that's okay, but it becomes too much, too heady. So just sitting and appreciating that space. And sometimes when you're distracted, then to go back to the generation of bodhicitta, and then start sitting from that point. And sometimes that also kind of clears the decks, particularly when we become very, very wrapped up in our distractions. It can help to clear the decks by shifting our attention away from ourself, me, the one who is terribly distracted, and oh my goodness, how did I get so wrapped up in that? And oh, I just noticed I'm still wrapped up in it. Oh, yeah. But to actually shift and to, again, extend that sense of connection and the sense of well-wishing, that sense of the warmth, kind of filling space with that sense of warmth, and then to begin sitting again. So those are ways to... do you have any additional thoughts?
Okay, so it sounds a little bit like doing the reflections or contemplations and recitations that are based in compassion, that as long as you're actively doing those, they will kind of steep your calm abiding in that aspect, yeah?
Yeah, but you actually have to engage the piece of it where you confront the illusion of separateness and kind of become clear that's the illusion. That it's not that we're making up connection to others. That's always the case. And really kind of exploring that over and over and over again, so it just becomes kind of part of the sense. It's like, instead of here I am all alone in this room, and that's the reality is just this room. Now here I am all in the midst of my connection with all sentient beings.
Yeah, you're saying that I do realize that maybe subconsciously, or I kind of think of it as, oh, I need to generate compassion, or I need to generate connection with other people.
Mm-hmm.
But it seems a little bit, maybe it's more of uncovering that illusion.
Yeah.
Or
Recognizing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Uncovering, recognizing, and recalling that connection.
I think there's something too that, I mean, it can feel like we're, kind of working on one or the other. They sometimes feel like different things. And I think in a sense that's okay, because it's different, there's different instructions and something slightly different to do. But I think having the confidence that, it's helpful to have the confidence that if we continue and deepen our calm abiding, that it really will join with and help uncover the compassionate side. And so the experience may not be that way for some time, but then I think eventually it goes to something that's just much deeper and does make a connection more than we might think. Yeah. So it's not, calm abiding is not something that's bereft of of compassion, or it's on that same path, but it's a different thing that we're cultivating.
I was wondering when can you work mantra within calm abiding? Like sometimes I will do like Muni Muni Maha Muni Soha to myself and have the Buddha in my mind as a form of the meditation, sometimes to like just center myself. Like if my mind wanders or if I'm tired, then it's a good one. Like I was finding myself falling asleep in this last session. Not falling asleep, but like having tons of almost dreamlike images come into my brain. So I was like, I kind of pulled myself into just, just doing that. And it, kept me more. So I'm wondering if that's like kind of the similar sort of, if that's, I don't know, if you, I guess you know what I'm asking. No.
I'll pretend.
Okay. Like when is a good time to use mantra? Is that like appropriate? Like, is it?
I'll give two exactly opposite answers. The first one's more tongue-in-cheek, just to relieve the suspense. He said, like, no, you can't do that in shamatha. But that's, and I say that from the perspective of we can become kind of critical, sort of judgmental of our practice, and then think we should try something else and try something else. And then the practice just becomes the practice of continual inventions of new ways to judge our practice and be dissatisfied and think that something else later is going to be better. So from that point of view, it's kind of good to keep things simple. That said, what you're doing is fine. So do you see the difference? That
Yes.
You had a particular situation arise. It wasn't a matter of just kind of, I don't know, I wish this was better somehow, so maybe I'll try this, maybe I'll try that. In the case that you're talking about, it is good to have some methods. You could say antidotes that we can use to kind of restart. And so the mantra of the Buddha that's good, and kind of the devotional side of that sense of connection there, that's a very useful thing. But generally speaking, if we just talk about a calm abiding session. Ideally, it's just we started out with a method, we stick with the method, we finish the session, we dedicate, we're done. And in that, the model of simplicity within that is the kind of the core sense of it, keeping it simple and not making extra complications for ourselves. But we do have complications sometimes. And so sometimes it's good to do things like that.
Thanks.
Just to add that when we do the Vajrayana practices, where we might visualize the Buddha and use the mantra or Chenrezig or whatever, that we are, I mean, those practices do cultivate calm abiding and insight, which we also do with these other methods that don't involve the mantra or visualization. So it's, you know, it's definitely a way, it's definitely can help calm abiding, but anyway, but agreeing with the idea that it's an antidote in this situation, would be an antidote and reasonable. Of course, and also, not to chase one thing after another.
Right. I think I initially, like probably around a year ago or so, I was doing that more often, where I would go from counting to mantra to something else to something else to something else, and I just sort of, I think it was a suggestion from you at one point of just of not doing that. So I then so over the last, I don't know, 6 months, I guess, I've simplified my practice to try to just do one thing every time through it, and which has helped. But I sometimes wonder when is a good time to use mantra in general, like how
when you're doing that practice.
So I was already doing it. Okay.
Yeah, and when you say, oh, that's a reasonable thing to do as an antidote, if that presupposes that you actively did it as a practice at some other time, so that you would be familiar with the mantra, you'd be familiar with the visualization, the image of the Buddha. So you have to kind of cultivate that as that's its own practice.
I see.
Yeah.
Cool.
But if you want to go into the question of, generally speaking, what palette of practices to put together, that's another question. And then that requires a little bit more individual spelunking into kind of what's going on, what's useful. That's quite an individual thing.
Well, and also mantra as a carrying practice is certainly can be helpful too, if we're trying to, I mean, it's a nice practice when if we catch ourselves just kind of spinning with unhelpful thinking going on, that we're just, say, walking down the street and we find ourselves just filling our minds with things that are not making any positive impacts for us, then, the idea of kind of using mantra at that time can be really helpful to just clear out our minds and give the mind something to do that's not a negative spinning.
It's actually a profoundly positive.
Yeah.
And the more that we've cultivated an active, formal relationship with it, and have some sense of appreciation, just like if we really kind of connect with the mantra for the Buddha, and we really have some appreciation for the Buddha, and the mantra. The mantra, in a certain sense, we can say, kind of from a formal teaching point of view, it's no different than the Buddha. Like the mantra of Chenrisi is no different than Chenrisi. So that's kind of, that elevates it a little bit. So it's beyond simply protection from spinning in negative ways. When the more we've actually cultivated the sense of deep appreciation for and have some sense of kind of sort of seeing it or feeling it, then that can be invoked when that's part of what comes with reciting the mantra.
Very cool.
But that requires not just occasionally humming a few bars while we're on the bus, but actually sitting down and really engaging in some active contemplation and active practice, so that becomes kind of alive.
So like active practice separate from when you're feeling intense. Yeah. I've used mantra in that sense. Like sometimes if I notice that like I have a lot of cyclical or just rumination and all this other stuff, I will try to break that up using mantra, and it more than anything else will help. So it's but it also, your answers have given another dimension to that practice, and the practice of doing it on my own, not when I'm troubled. So yeah, thank you.
I wanted to ask a question about shamatha with a, what do you call that? Like shamatha with an object, or shamatha using an object as an anchor or of some kind. I've found that I've been trying to figure out what it is I'm doing exactly when I'm sitting here during our shamatha sits. And I've kind of run the gamut of I'm not practicing shamatha at all, to I'm practicing shamatha without an object, to various other things where I couldn't, I have no way of confirming whether or not I'm practicing any of those things. But I have kind of started to figure out what it is that I am doing, and sort of like an element of what's going on. I found that bringing in some intentional object to place awareness on doesn't really bring,
like the experience of the breath, for example.
Yeah, something like that. A lot of the time that becomes another thing that's been added on to all the other things that are going on in the mind for me. It's sort of like just one more thing to kind of like one more thing that just kind of like to spin about. Am I doing it? Am I not doing it? Getting really caught up in ideas of like, success and failure. Am I doing it? Am I doing it right? And more often than, like almost every time, I tend to drop any intentional tether or anchor, and really just go to the moment, like the present experience itself. Most of the time, what appears to be going on outside of my mind, with there being nothing in particular, and I'm really just kind of trying to figure out if, like, am I practicing shamatha with some kind of object that really isn't visual? I don't know. I'm just really wondering.
It's shamatha with an object. It's still shamatha with an object.
See, in the same way that it's in the same way that shamatha with the breath is just shamatha with some other object that is just not a visual object.
Yeah. One thing one thing to do with that, all those, that spinning, the thinking, the judging, and all that, is to look, don't worry about it at all, but just notice the distinction between the sensation of the breath and those things. And just there's a sensation. And do it very briefly. Even just a few breaths. And then open. And then come back and for a few breaths. But always, when those other things enter, it doesn't just treat them, it just doesn't matter one bit. They're exactly what they are. But in the moment, just being able to notice this sensation is this sensation. Those thoughts are those thoughts. For these 3 breaths, I will notice the flow of that experience. Then open.
So it is possible to integrate, that makes a lot of sense, and I never really thought of the short session pattern as really working with any kind of object. I think a lot of it is sort of just my habit of thinking of object as visual, object as a discrete.
We can say
thing.
reference.
Yes, yeah. Rather than as a
with a reference.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes a lot more sense now. Because I always wonder, because I'm not practicing with a particular, discrete conceptual thing, that I'm not doing it right.
Yeah. Those thoughts don't matter.
Good.
Is it? I've forgotten the clever little quip. It's something about. Don't trust your own thoughts. But it's much more clever than that. Yeah, don't believe everything you think. Yeah. Don't believe everything you think. In this case, it's there's a humorous song about letters to Dear Abby, and in all the answers, Dear Abby says, "Now listen up, Buster, and listen up good. Stop wishing for bad luck and knocking on wood." So stop wishing for bad luck. It's very easy. I mean, we can become very well trained in that. But it's basically 100% irrelevant.
The habit of looking out for the bad stuff.
Yeah, it's just like, it's just a habit. Then we have the habit of criticizing ourselves for criticizing ourselves.
Yeah, that's that.
That's
that layering thing. It's so easy for the that feeling of like not really being satisfied with the simple practice, and that it sort of adds it almost feels easier to just kind of keep adding the layers of criticism.
Yeah. Yep. Linda, did you have something? I was just. just being of service. All right.
Briefly, maybe to offer something for you to add to your question, something that a friend of mine shared with me, kind of on this topic. I think it was in reference to self-criticism, that it's like looking for a host. Like self-criticism is looking for a host, or and that it'll kind of take hold of whatever material you allow it to have. That I don't know, that phrase somehow helped me with that kind of stuff, so I just thought I'd mention it. But.
Yeah. Dora.
Well, I think all our tendencies are like that. So if we tend to be anxious, then we might, I feel like, I come to see that my anxiety is looking for a host. I mean, so I think whatever our predilection is, that's quite apt, and that's something we can learn through watching what happens. How come this keeps happening to me? Well, maybe I keep happening. That's it. Maybe
I'm
what
still
I
happening.
am. Yeah. And
those things are out there, that's not actually what's happening at all.
right.
It's you doing it, It's not that
Right.
you keep having flaws that you notice.
Right.
It's not like that those are becoming like larger or more things are happening. You're just doing that.
Yeah. Yeah. And then too, we can see that, my anxiety is not me either. It really doesn't it is really something that, if it's a habit, it's something that can come or go. And I don't have to be wedded to it.
Yeah. This in a certain way goes back to the question we were talking about, what can happen on retreat. You find out really clearly how this is operating. Looking, there I am. I'm telling myself stories about things that never happened, and I don't have anything even in the past several months that would be remotely like this situation, and I'm completely worked up as though I was right in the middle of it. It's like, definitely just find that. It's in a certain way, there are remarkable tools in meditation that we can use on retreat. There are all kinds of methods, and they are remarkable in themselves. But one of the most profound things on retreat is just having the opportunity for those tools to highlight these tendencies in a way that we can actually see them with great clarity. And then we also have the other aspect of so there's a way in which they can kind of release just because we can see them with clarity. But the other aspects of the methods that we use on retreat are more the activation of things that connect us to our profound potential. So those, we're talking about connecting with the depth of the mantra. So we have some experience with that. So we have these two sides going on. But a huge piece of retreat is just finding out how this stuff bubbles. Yes.
I actually don't have a question. I wanted to just say how much impact. I've heard that story about the Mara, the Buddha, and the temptation, and it's kind of tying into everything that we're talking about here. Mm-hmm. The anxiety, a lot of it. But for some reason, in the last couple of weeks, I'm coming around the other side of the struggle with the temptation and the fear, and how I've been living inside of a lot of that. And listening to that, like I said, I've heard this story 20, 30 times since the 1980s, and it's finally kind of connecting for me. And I really appreciate you bringing that up this evening. That's all.
You're welcome. Have we reached the now that instead of going into the anxiety of, oh my goodness, isn't somebody going to say something? Are we going to have to sit? Just allow the space to open and go back to the sense of connection to all beings, sense of filling space with kind of just basic warmth. And then we can dedicate.
By this virtue may I quickly realize Mahamudra and establish all beings without exception in this state. Thank you all.
Thanks.